Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk about secular humanism today. So stay tuned. You're in the right place. In 2012, a survey of the European Union by Eurobarometer found that 16% identified as non-believers and agnostics, while 7% identified as atheists. In a survey of 65 countries conducted by Gallup International and the WI Network of Market Research of 63,898 people, researchers found China to be the world's least religious country. 90% claim to be atheists or non-religious there, followed by Sweden at 76% and the Czech Republic at 75%. The percentages of atheists and agnostic in the United States has also been trending upward from 2% of atheists and 3% agnostics in 2009 to 4% atheists and 5% agnostics in 2018 and 2019, according to the Pew studies. How do we get here? Max Weber made an interesting observation in 1905 with the Protestant work ethic and the spirit of capitalism. He noticed that the Catholics had made significant time and financial investments in the architecture of their churches in places such as France, Spain, and Italy. Beautiful, majestic churches dot the country's sides and cities throughout Southern Europe. The most beautiful and awe-inspiring church I have ever been in was in Milan, the Piazza Duomo. When I walked through the doors of this regal and breathtaking structure, I was immediately humbled and jolted as my thirst was quenched by the holy water of the Lord. These great buildings contrast the thrifty, inornate boxes of many Protestant churches in Germany, where Max Weber resided, and other countries of Western and Northern Europe. When I first read Max Weber's book around 15 years ago, I considered his point that the Protestants were focused on a strong work ethic, thrift, and prosperity, while the Catholics were focused on the meek shall inherit the world. To that end, Max asserted that the Catholics were less likely to be entrepreneurial and to invest in businesses and more likely to invest in their church buildings. He pointed to capitalism in the United States and Ben Franklin as the outcomes of entrepreneurial Protestant investments. The Catholic Church is a hierarchy directed from Rome, while the Protestant Church is more egalitarian and decentralized. The decline in religiosity in Northern and Western Europe beggars the question, were the Catholics right all along? Perhaps we need to be awestruck and humbled. Perhaps the coronavirus pandemic is God's wake-up call to the world. As C.S. Lewis has said, pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasure, speaks to us in our consciences, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. The distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic religiosity is important here. People who have high levels of intrinsic religiosity focus on their relationship with God, while people who have high levels of extrinsic religiosity focus on what the church can do for them. As President John F. Kennedy once said, and I will tweak for this point, ask not what your God and church can do for you, but what you can do for your God and church. Those high in extrinsic religiosity go to the church for its extrinsic benefits and community, while those high in intrinsic religiosity go to the church for an intrinsic relationship with God. Many beneficial health outcomes come from the latter. Perhaps it's the former group who have largely left the churches in Europe. As the West has become increasingly wealthy and the church is no longer needed for its provisions and governments with their generous social safety nets have supplanted the church there, the sunny day church fans have determined that Sunday mornings are better spent in bed. To illustrate this point, consider Sweden. According to cross-cultural scholars such as Gert Hofstede and Shalom Schwartz, Sweden has very high levels of feminism and egalitarianism. Their generous social safety nets far exceed those of the United States. Both parents are entitled to 240 days of paid leave after the birth of their child in Sweden. In the US, workers are entitled to 12 weeks or 84 days of unpaid leave. The government helps the poor and sick in Sweden, while in the US, individuals are called to contribute donations to their churches and other humanitarian organizations. Sweden's healthcare system is mainly government funded, universal and decentralized, while the US is the only developed country in the world that hasn't provided its citizens universal healthcare. An interesting and perhaps related point is that the United States has the highest levels of religiosity and Christianity of any other highly developed, wealthy country in the West. It is an outlier, and its relatively high levels of religiosity undoubtedly annoy the 4% of its population who have self-identified as atheists. Ron Engelhardt of the University of Michigan has been administering the World Values Survey since 1981. He has identified what he calls Euro-secularization, which is the trend away from traditional religious values toward more secular, rational values. When I first came upon his work in 2002, I believed this movement was positive. I had myself been trending away from religion to a more rational, spiritual position. At least that's what I thought. Yet now I see the flaws in my thinking. The trend to Euro secularization has not been a net benefit for Europe. Atheism has been the outcome. And when an atheist takes his position to its logical conclusion, nihilism results. Let us not forget that Friedrich Nietzsche portended what the world would be like without God. In the godless communist regimes of the USSR, China, and Cambodia, estimates indicate that around 120 million perished in the last century. Here's what the US Library of Congress states happened, which seems to have been lost on too many teaching history today. And I'm quoting directly. This is a direct quote, and I will end the quote when I'm done. It's a little bit of a long quote. The Soviet Union was the first state to have as an ideological objective the elimination of religion. Toward that end, the communist regime confiscated church property, ridiculed religion, harassed believers, and propagated atheism in the schools. Actions towards particular religions, however, were determined by state interests, and most organized religions were never outlawed. The main target of the anti-religious campaign in the 1920s and 1930s was the Russian Orthodox Church, which had the largest number of faithful. Nearly all of its clergy and many of its believers were shot or sent to labor camps. Theological schools were closed. My thing is freezing up here. Hold on one second. And church publications were prohibited. By 1939, only about 500 of over 50,000 churches remained opened. After Nazi Germany's attack on the Soviet Union in 1941, Joseph Stalin revived the Russian Orthodox Church to intensify patriotic support for the war effort. By 1957, about 22,000 Russian Orthodox churches had become active. But in 1959, Nikita Khrushchev initiated his own campaign against the Russian Orthodox Church and forced the closure of about 12,000 churches. By 1985, fewer than 7,000 churches remained active. Members of the church hierarchy were jailed or forced out, their places taken by docile clergy, many of whom had ties with the KGB. Campaigns against other religions were closely associated with particular nationalities, especially if they recognized a foreign religious authority, such as the Pope. By 1926, the Roman Catholic Church had no bishops left in the Soviet Union, and by 1941, only 2 of the almost 1,200 churches that had existed in 1917, mostly in Lithuania, were still active. The Ukrainian Catholic Church, linked with the Ukrainian nationalism, was forcibly subordinated in 1946 to the Russian Orthodox Church, and the autocephalous Orthodox churches of Belarus and Ukraine were suppressed twice in the late 1920s and again in 1944. Still quoting, attacks on Judaism were endemic throughout the Soviet period, and the organized practice of Judaism became almost impossible. Protestant denominations and other sects were also persecuted. The All-Union Council of Evangelical Christian Baptists, established by the government in 1944, typically was forced to confine its activities to the narrow act of worship and denied most opportunities for religious teaching and publication. Fearful of a pan-Islamic movement, the Soviet regime systematically suppressed Islam by force until 1941. The Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union that year led the government to adopt a policy of official toleration of Islam while actively encouraging atheism among Muslims, end quote. In modern times, many atheists and agnostics have relabeled themselves as secular humanists, which is an attempt to smuggle in some Christian values while ignoring the Christian God. According to secularhumanism.org, secular humanism is a comprehensive, non-religious life stance incorporating 1, a naturalistic philosophy, 2, a cosmic outlook rooted in science, and 3, a consequentialist ethical system. These tenets are deeply flawed, as I will explicate next. Let's first talk about a naturalistic philosophy. A naturalistic position is a position where people believe that everything we experience can be explained by natural causes or properties, excluding supernatural or spiritual explanations. People who endorse naturalism believe that everything can be explained by science. This belief is also known as scientism. Naturalism is flawed because it fails to explain our conscience, spirituality, laws of logic, objective stance-independent moral values and duties, consciousness, apprehension of aesthetics, art and beauty, reasoning, mathematical principles, apprehension of abstract concepts, dreams, and appreciation for virtues such as love, empathy, honesty, forgiveness, equality of opportunities, equity, and justice. In other words, naturalism fails to explain numerous important aspects of our daily lives. Next, the cosmic outlook. According to secularhumanism.org, secular humanism provides a cosmic outlook. a worldview in the broadest sense, grounding our lives in the context of our universe and relying on methods demonstrated by science. Secular humanists see themselves as undesigned, unintended beings who arose through evolution, possessing unique attributes of self-awareness and moral agency, end quote. This relates to a famous phrase by atheist Richard Dawkins: DNA neither cares nor knows, DNA just is, and we dance to its music. A cosmic outlook rooted in science sounds impressive, yet this outlook alone is not enough to explain the depth and breadth of humanity. Are we mere pounds of flesh, or are we individuals who actively seek agency, meaning, purpose, love, and the truth? Are we just the lucky beneficiaries of cosmic accidents who miraculously evolved from primordial soup into conscious beings whose DNA sequence consists of 3.5 billion well-ordered letters? If you saw the words "I love you" written on the beach, would you assume they accidentally appeared from varying ocean tides? Or would you assume a mind was behind the statement? Now imagine a logical sequence or sentence with words containing 3.5 billion letters. DNA is a code, and a code does not come without a coder. Give the coder credit where the credit is due. Once one pursues the truth and the Lord makes himself even more obvious than nature has revealed, the world opens one's eyes to see everything differently. As C.S. Lewis has said, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. Nature becomes more vivid as the colors of the grasses become greener and the sky bluer. Flowers, mountains, rainbows, palm trees, the sea, and the stars appears the handiwork of a creator who appreciates beauty and who loves his creation. Now let's speak to the consequentialist ethical system. Our conscience further speaks to God's intense love for us. The moral argument states that if we have objective moral values and duties that transcend eras and cultures, we must have an objective and transcendent moral lawgiver. Numerous studies have indicated we have objective moral values and duties to follow the golden rule, and these transcend people and generations. Accordingly, we have a divine moral lawgiver. What are objective moral values and duties? To be objective is to state that moral values and duties do not change as a function of anyone's opinions. They are stance independent. Objective moral values refer to values that are objectively good or bad, while objective moral duties refer to duties that are objectively right or wrong. Moral values are descriptive, or as is, while moral duties are prescriptive, or what ought to be. Objective moral values include the values of life, liberty, love, truth, justice, equality of opportunities, and equity. Objective moral duties include the duty to love the Lord above all else, to love our neighbors as ourselves, and to follow the golden rule. In the United States, our founding fathers held certain truths to be self-evident: life, liberty, equality, and the pursuit of happiness. Over time, we discover these now axiomatic values as we live, learn, and love. Whether objective morality exists is an ontological question. Ontology is a branch of metaphysics that deals with the nature of being. Moral ontology asks whether morals exist independently to be discovered by people. How we come to believe in certain moral values and duties and whether we are justified in these beliefs is an epistemological question. I will next focus on the ontological question of whether objective morality exists. In the concentration camps of Nazi Germany in the 1940s, the security guards routinely starved Jewish prisoners prior to telling them they would be getting a shower. Then they packed them into a room like sardines and gassed them to death. This activity is objectively wrong. It is a clear and unjust violation of the prisoners' human rights to justice, life, and liberty. Even if the Nazis won and persisted in their scheme to murder all of the physically and mentally handicapped, the Jews, the Gypsies, and anyone else they deemed inferior, and all who were left on the planet agreed with them, their actions would still be objectively wrong. The standards of righteousness and values of life and love do not change by people's opinions. As another example, parents who care for their infants by feeding, bathing, clothing, and loving them are acting in ways that are objectively morally right. They're acting in accordance with our moral values to love and protect those in need. Just because someone can identify outliers who believe that parents should not care for their children, or can identify outliers who are bad parents, does not mean we do not have the objective moral values and duties. To put this another way, just because Johnny does not understand or like math does not mean math does not exist. These are two of many examples to support the assertion we have objective moral values and duties. The next question is in grounding. What is the source of our objective morality? While some atheists are moral relativists who deny objective morality exists, others do not. One example of one of these types of people is Skylar Fiction, which I may debate soon. But instead of grounding it in God, they ground it in consequentialism. These are the objective morality believers who are non-believers, actually. Consequentialism is in the normative ethical framework along with deontology. Deontological ethics state we have certain moral imperatives or duties to do what's right. These imperatives are grounded in a metaphysical cause. Consequentialism states that the best moral actions are those whose consequences are the most ideal. A form of consequentialism is utilitarianism, which states that the best moral actions are those whose consequences benefit the greatest number of people. Secular humanists claim the grounding of our objective morality is in the subjective agreed upon consequence. An example of this is Matt Dillahunty, and another one is Sam Harris. For example, Sam Harris states that humans agree that we should maximize our well-being, which he relates to happiness and pleasure. Therefore, he grounds our objective morality in our subjective desires to maximize happiness and pleasure. His argument is circular, wordplay. One cannot say the source of our objective morality is also the subjective desired consequence. This equates to saying the source of our legal system, lawmakers, is also the desired consequence of our legal system, justice. It would also be equivalent to saying the source of our property rights, government, is also the desired consequence of our property rights, promotion of investment. The mindful source is never also the consequence. Accordingly, key tenets of secular humanism are flawed, as naturalism, scientism, and the grounding of our objective morality in the consequence fail to fully explain the human experience and pass the logical sniff tests. Beyond these arguments, consider the logical outcomes of secular humanism. In their worldview, our moral values and duties are merely social conventions and preferences for particular outcomes. The secular humanist, who endorses the idea that all values are relative to one's culture, has no way to justify her belief that Adolf Hitler did anything wrong. Hitler's society endorsed his lunacy, believing they were right in destroying lesser people. The relativist cannot draw from any objective moral standards or universal human rights to state he was wrong because they do not believe we have either. The secular humanist, who endorses objective morality, may be able to draw on a standard, but he also believes there is no ultimate punishment for evil. In his worldview, Adolf Hitler will never be punished. He will never face justice for his evil infliction of extreme pain on millions. Beyond that, why should the secular humanist care about what Hitler did? To them, we're just blobs of flesh with no ultimate meaning or purpose who are doomed to perish one day. We're undesigned, uncaused, and no better than the primordial soup from which we came. We are only animals in a global race for survival. With this mindset, they could make the case that the elimination of those Hitler deemed unfit left more resources for everyone else in this cruel and evil world. Of course, these latter statements are meant to get your attention, but if we need to kick the beanbag upon which the secular humanist, anti-theist, resides while furiously banging on his keyboard in a rant against God, let's do him that favor. Secular humanists will claim they want to maximize their time in this world by treating their fellow humans fairly and righteously, but many don't. Many are also anti-theists who will spend hours on the internet every day bashing anyone who believes in God. They'll make long YouTube diatribes and will show up in debates about God, devoting their lives to battling believers. Examples include Aaron Ra, Matt Dillahunty, David Silverman, and Seth Andrews. Many of these types will congregate at the Faithless Forum and other similar conferences so they can compare notes on what they don't believe in. Why? Some are mad at God, or have had very, very bad experiences in the church or with other Christians. Some don't want to live by God's rules. Some want to be their own God, but all know God exists. Romans 1:20 makes that clear. We all have been given the evidence, and we need to believe in the existence of God. The book of Romans also makes it clear that people choose. If they choose to reject God, he sends a powerful delusion to them so they can live out the consequences of their decision as if God does not exist. Joshua 24:10 tells us we have a choice. We can choose to believe in God, or we can choose other gods, but let us not pretend there is no God. His general revelation in nature makes his presence obvious. His specific revelation in Jesus gives us hope, meaning, and love. Perhaps it's the cognitive dissonance between knowing God is real and trying to stifle that truth that drives so many to the internet to battle with theists, and most particularly Christians. The way these keyboard warriors devote so much of their time to promoting their secular humanism or atheism or anti-theism is curious, given how precious their time here is. As David Wood has observed, their anti-theistic efforts highlight the spiritual presence of something much darker within them. According to Romans 2:15, they show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them, and at other times even defending them. So I'm back here into the chat, and I'm observing the chat. I want to see if there are any questions. Yes, this is a live conversation that we're having. I My dog has decided to start scratching herself, so that's a little bit noisy. But I see that Sandra's in the chat. So God makes people deny he exists. No, he doesn't make people deny he exists. That's not how it works. God says that everyone knows he exists, but some try to stifle that information. Once they stifle that information, he basically lets them do that. So in your case, Sandra, yes, he has let you do that. You actually know there is a God. Romans makes that quite clear, and you have stifled the information. Okay, so that's the bottom line. So let me see what else we have here. If there's any other reasonable questions, it looks like I've got one Christian in the chat and all kinds of atheists. So Jesse Camping, Sandra, and AY, I'll just say hello to you, welcome, and I hope you're having a good afternoon now, or morning or evening or whatever it is in your part of the world. I know Sandra's over in Germany. I made some comments on Germany talking about Max Weber. I hope you appreciated that, Sandra. If you haven't yet picked up his book, it's called The Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. It's a really wonderful book, highly recommend it. And I am busy working on a book. That was a chapter, actually. That's from chapter 2 of my brand new book that I'm working on right now. And what I'm going to do next is work on chapter 3 today. I was supposed to talk to G-Man, but he had to cancel because of he's moving. So instead, I'm going to work on chapter 3. And in chapter 3, I'm going to focus a lot on what Jonathan Haidt has written on moral values. So Jonathan Haidt has come up with this moral foundations theory. He's an atheist. He's out of New York University, Stern School of Business, teaching ethics. I also teach ethics and leadership. He's teaching ethics and leadership, and I really appreciate his work. But I disagree with him on what the foundation of these moral codes are. And so I think I made a pretty good case for what the foundation is. So I want to say hello to everybody who's in here. And if I have no questions, I can just cut off the stream. Can't talk right now. But if I do, if anyone does have questions or thoughts or opinions on anything I said, please share them now so I can expand on anything I said. So I'll wait a moment. A really sad thing I'll just mention that happened that I found out yesterday. My brother, who runs a really successful business in Southeast Florida, had to lay off some of his workers. And I'm just really sad about it because they have also, I didn't think he'd come into many hard times, but he's also come into some harder times with fewer people renting out equipment. That's what my brother does. And so apparently a couple of his workers offered to be laid off. And so he laid them off. They basically didn't want to be working with risking their lives at this coronavirus. So that's the bottom line. Do I realize the average German had no clue about the majority of the Nazi regime and their actions? Yes. Actually, yes, I do realize that, Sandra. My family is from Germany, and they were in Kaiserslautern, they're in Steinwenden, and they're in Mannheim, and where else are they now? My brother's in Berlin. I know that my family had no idea that this was going on, and I know that they're pretty average Germans. And so I would guess that unfortunately they kept that under the wraps. And so it was a horrific thing that came out and the whole world discovered. And I'm sure a lot of people have stressed out about that in the decades since. And I know the German population is very suspect. They're very suspicious of people who are considered charismatic leaders. The Globe studies led by Robert House have indicated that. So they don't like charismatic leaders because they feel like they were duped by Adolf Hitler. Very charismatic leader apparently, but they didn't realize what he was doing behind the scenes. So it's pretty awful. So no, I'm not saying society. I would say the SS soldiers. Maybe I'll reword that for the future. So yes, if I claim German society, no, I definitely did not say that. I've got German relatives myself who didn't know what was going on. And so we will just go ahead and say that. And I also feel that Hitler was also taking advantage of a poor economic situation from World War I carrying over to World War II in Germany because they lost World War I. So he was taking advantage of the stress and the economic situation to try to claim that there's a higher race. And he was completely wrong. In fact, that's one of the beautiful things about the American Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all have equality. We might not all be equal. It's true. Some people have higher IQs, some are taller, shorter, more beautiful, all that kind of stuff. We're actually unequal. But according to our our Declaration of Independence, and even according to the United Nations, all are considered equal. All humans have equal rights. All are given equality of opportunity. And that's really a wonderful thing that comes from Christianity. You can give a lot of credit to Christianity for that, according to people like Tom Holland of Dominion. So let's see, can you tell Sandra I have cookies fresh baked? That sounds wonderful. Jesse, what kind of cookies did you bake? I've been hearing a lot about people baking. I was just on Twitter and somebody said they were baking cookies today. So I might have to bake some cookies for my sons. I haven't baked cookies in a long time. I'm not really into sweets, but I know they are. And I actually bought a lot of ice cream for them and they really enjoyed it. And I even bought some chocolate magic shell to put on top of the ice cream, and it immediately freezes. And they just love that. It gets real hard and it tastes like candy on your ice cream. So that is one little thing that we've had in the house. And so, Declaration is a secular document. Yes, but it was written by mostly Christian authors. I'll just mention that the founding fathers, 51 of 55 of them were Christian, just in case you're wondering. So people make a big deal out of the few deists who were in the group, but the rest of them were all Christian. Oh, oatmeal, delicious. Hey, that's a good idea. I actually have oatmeal here. I could probably make oatmeal raisin cookies. That would be pretty good. So anyway, I want to say thank you everybody for coming in. I really appreciate the fact you're here and I hope you'll like and subscribe and please do come again. I'm going to go ahead and end the stream.